because we came from the fossil fuel vehicles. We took out the diesel tank and we put in a huge battery, not thinking that we could be doing this in another way. Instead of transporting goods or people, they end up transporting huge batteries. In Swedish, electricity is el, so it's el on road. And even though many people think that we have something to do with Elon Musk, we have nothing to do with him. What stood out here was the easiness to work with the InnovX, and also the deep understanding of what kind of creature a startup company is. So I would say in a business-to-business context, it's logistic firms, it's port operators that we are really, really keen to get more contacts with.
Hello and welcome to the InnovX Innovators Podcast. I'm Adrian Săcelanu, a business journalist covering the tech industry since the late 90s, and your host for these new episodes. In this series, we examine the work of European innovators who are reshaping industries and driving change. Our podcast is produced by InnovX, a startup hub founded in Romania in 2019. Recently, InnovX was recognized by Financial Times, Sifted, and Statista as one of the leading startup accelerators in Europe and the top accelerator in Eastern Europe. Today's episode features Elonroad, a company dedicated to building a new internet of efficient mobility, seamlessly connecting people and goods. The company's mission is to revolutionize how we move, reducing emissions and optimizing transportation networks for a more sustainable and accessible world. Joining us today is Anna Wieslander, COO of Elonroad. Welcome, Anna. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for that fantastic introduction. I think you have read up on us already.
Well, yes, I did a brief research of what you published on your website. Also kind of knew about you before, since you joined the InnovX program. But let's start by this. Maybe I think you could describe better what is the aim of Elonroad.
Yeah. And to be very, very quick and take it down to, the 5-year-old level, our 5-second pitch is that we are just like a Scalectic car track. And most of you have probably played with it when you were a kid. And the little cars, and they were on a track and they could go forever and ever. And that is just what we do. So our name is really what we do. In Swedish, electricity is el, so it's el on road. And even though many people think that we have something to do with Elon Musk, I must, disappoint or the other way. Depends on how you see it. We have nothing to do with him. So it's basically electricity on the road, which means that you can drive endlessly without range anxiety. We want to introduce range happiness for the electrified future mobility system.
That's a great pitch with range getting
Happiness.
away of the range. Yes, getting away of the range anxiety. So in a way, you could help Elon Musk
exactly.
with his Tesla cars.
Yeah.
So walk us a little bit through the history of your project. When was it started, and where are you at this point?
Yeah. So the company was founded already 10 years ago by Don Cetreus, who is actually a TV producer here in Sweden. He was early on in buying an EV, but he got frustrated because the battery was small. He didn't have a good place to charge, and he couldn't listen to the radio because it took too much energy. So he was driving in Sweden in the winter, and in the roads in the winter, you get this slush pile in the middle of the road. And he was thinking, it's always there. Couldn't we do something with this? And having also the idea of this Scalectic car track. So he went home and built a first prototype together with his son, a little Lego car with a track. And then he took the idea to the technical university in Lund. There he found a professor that actually had been working with electrical roads for quite a while, because it's not a new idea. We have been working with electrical roads for more than 100 years in the world. Just look at the trams or the buses that are in many cities, not to say the railway. So for us, it's just taking a technology that's there and proven, but putting it into a new context and making sure that it benefits many, many more people and making it possible to make the shift towards the EV. So Don and this professor, they started to work together with some PhD students, some master's thesis students, and then they built the first proof of concept with the help of the Swedish innovation system. And then we actually won a tender with the Swedish traffic authority. So to deploy one of the 4 test tracks that Sweden have had for testing and collecting insights and knowledge. And then he realized that, okay, this is going to be something. This is a real thing. So he onboarded an external CEO, and there we started to build a company, and that was around 4.5 years ago. So a lot of dedication towards the R&D and safety in the beginning, and starting to build a company in the last 4 years.
And how was this journey for the company? And I'm trying to get you to discuss a little bit how is the European startup ecosystem doing, and how are, let's say, dreamers or innovators treated here, because we hear a lot of discussions about the differences between what's happening in the USA, for example, and what's happening here in Europe. So I kind of always try to get entrepreneurs and innovators to share their experience.
Well, I only have experience from the European setup, so I can't really, comment on the US, even though I know there's a lot more money in the US, but I think also it's a little bit harsher climate. I think in Europe we have a very good innovation scene. I mean, we are deeply rooted in R&D, and we believe in technology. I think also the European Union has taken really, really significant steps in policies and regulations in making sure to drive new technologies. And it's always a double-edged sword, I would say, with regulations, because in some cases, maybe you hinder technology because you put the frames too narrow or with the background that you have. But sometimes you can also promote, because once you put down the foot, then people have to do something. So I think it's better always to do something and take a stand and not wait. And I think in Europe, actually, we have been quite good at that, to drive the change, even though in a short sight, we might then be not as competitive compared to Asia or US, but in the long run, it's the only way to go, to put down some hard regulations on CO2 emissions.
And I'm wondering, which were the things that helped you the most in this journey? Was it, I don't know, a financing round, a grant, a piece of advice, a meeting with someone?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and it's impossible to point at one instance. But I think if I have to point at one instance, it would be when getting that tender for the test road. So the Swedish Traffic Authority actually daring to do that. But with that on the side, I would say it's a lot of small things that are happening all the time. For example, it's super important for us with the accelerator programs. It creates a lot of visibility. It creates a lot of PR. I mean, we are a small team, as all startups. We don't have any resources to put on public affairs or PR. So that help is really, really important to get visibility and accessibility to larger scenes. And I would say that is key in the innovation scene.
Okay, now it's the point when I'm going to ask you about how was your experience during the InnovX program?
Yeah, and I think it was, we've been part of a couple of different accelerators. And I think what stood out here was the easiness to work with the InnovX, and also the deep understanding of what kind of creature a startup company is. So I think the way that they geared and tailored the program, even though we were quite a big cohort, they were still able to gear and tailor it towards us that were there. So it gave value to us. And I would say the biggest value is the visibility and the network connection that we are getting.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And now that you said visibility is important, you never know who is going to watch this podcast. So I'd like to ask you if you know what you said at the start. Range anxiety is something common for everyone who owns an electric car. Maybe few of them don't have, which have the most expensive and larger batteries on board. But if someone sees this and thinks that maybe they want to give it a try and discuss with you and test this, and what are the steps, and how could you, if it's possible, to work with you and test things, let's say somewhere here in the region, in the Central and Eastern Europe, maybe somewhere else in Europe?
Well, I would say, our the way to create business with us is simply to contact us. Of course, we are very, very eager to learn and hear about our customers' problems, because the company is sprung out of a real problem, which is that when we do the transition to an EV, it's not functioning the way it used to with fossil fuels. It comes with a lot of more restrictions. So anyone who is having a fleet of EVs, we're looking deeply into terminals and ports and hub-to-hub operations. Of course, we are working also with electric roads on the highways, but it's driven more by the government and policy makers. So I would say, in a business-to-business context, it's logistic firms, it's port operators that we are really, really keen to get more contacts with.
Okay, and let me jump back on what are you doing, and I was wondering if you could share how was this year for you, if maybe you could share some important developments, maybe you started some new projects or discussions, or what can you share? How was this year so far for you?
We've had a great year. We have grown the company in 3 years from about 10 people to 30 people. So this year we have been putting a little bit extra effort into the sales and offer an order pipeline. So we have been growing that up to around 11 million euro, which we are super happy and proud about. We have also taken big steps in the productification. So really moving the needle from innovation to productification. And we are this year in the autumn now launching the first CE marked stationary charger, because we are working not only with the charge as you go, but also coming back to your logistics center or your hub and have an easy, seamless, autonomous charging on a stationary rail. So that is a huge milestone for us to be able to commercialize that product.
Maybe you could discuss a little bit the market and how are you different versus other providers of solutions for this? Because I think there are a lot of players, a lot of things appearing on the market. So let's discuss a little bit, how are you different?
it's a very good, thank you for the question. It's very good because what we tend to do as human beings, even though we are the smartest animal on the planet, we're also quite short-sighted and stupid because we came from the fossil fuel vehicles. We took out the diesel tank and we put in a huge battery, not thinking that we could be doing this in another way. So we are now treating the EVs in the same way. So we believe we have to stop and we have to fill up quickly. So a lot of focus is on huge batteries and stopping and filling up quickly. That comes with some potential hinders. It works when you have a small part of the transportation system transitioned into that. But the grid capacity, for one, is going to be a big blockage for this, because when all of the vehicles have transitioned and should be charging with megawatts, it's going to be tough on the grid. It's also the resource scarcity of batteries. So with a system that you can charge a little bit all the time, you can take down the battery sizes to a minimum. So the simulations that we have made is together also with both the Swedish Traffic Authority and the traffic authorities in France and Germany, is that you need a battery of the size around 20 kilometers if you deploy electric roads on the TNT network, which means that the capex cost for the vehicle is also going down drastically. So on a holistic level, having smaller batteries, a more balanced grid system where you can determine how much energy is which vehicle going to get at a certain moment in time is really going to make this shift able to happen.
And it's also car that is not weighing so much is going to be
exactly.
We are going to get rid of other problems because the big weight is putting pressure on the articulations of the car.
Exactly.
It's heavy, it's harder to brake, and so a lot of issues from this very big weight.
Exactly. So we see a lot of interest from companies that have started their electrification journey, and they maybe have bought a couple of EVs and are now looking at scaling up. And then they run into these issues, as you say, that instead of transporting goods or people, they end up transporting huge batteries. So you also have a risk of putting more vehicles on the road because the vehicles get heavier with the batteries and hence cannot have a lower payload, for example. So if we look back 10 years, people thought that our founder was crazy. I mean, you wouldn't believe the amount of ridiculousness that he has received in the early days. But now when people start running into these problems for real, it's like, okay, it is actually, one of the solutions that could untie this knot.
Well, it's something that happens to innovators. I think they look crazy for some time before things are happening the way they envisioned it. So it's a common story that I
think it's a very common story. And I think every great idea in the world was always, ridiculous at first. It's a lot of examples in history about that.
I'm coming back to what you said earlier, that sometimes people are short-sighted and not looking very much around. And I was wondering how are authorities, road safety institutions, if they are starting to be more open to these discussions and looking to a different way to do things. How are things progressing here?
The short answer to that is yes, it is absolutely progressing. And we see more and more movement in taking a more TCO view on, for example, tenders, that you're not only, now we buy the vehicles, then we buy the infrastructure, then we buy the charging systems. So more and more people are looking at, okay, what is the total cost of ownership? And we start to see a lot of comparisons between different technologies, where where electric roads with smaller batteries always comes out as the best alternative. Of course, it's also an industry that has been around for 100 years and more. So the industry is quite set in its regulations. But just as we experienced with COVID, when the shit hits the fan and we have to do something for real, things that we thought were truths are maybe not truths anymore. So we are also seeing a little bit of that in this area. But I also think that it's going too slow. Of course, we are in the very forefront of this. So for us, everybody is a little bit behind. But we're working hard on getting into the AFIR directive, which is regulating the charging infrastructure in Europe. And we've had quite good discussions with the delegates there. So it's getting more and more open towards new technologies, I would say.
As we discuss about how fast things are moving, a common road that we see for some European tech entrepreneurs is to move to the States and build their business. So I was wondering if it crossed your mind, or did you get any proposal? Or
yeah, we see quite a lot of interest from the States. We actually have a subsidiary already opened up. And especially California has very harsh regulations on climate change. So we have also a few projects that we are pursuing there, and partnerships also in the US. So absolutely, we see it's a little bit more progressive. Of course, not in all states, but California, New Mexico, we also see quite a lot of interest from Canada. Actually.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that you are working also in the US, but it makes sense to be there. So as we are approaching the end of this today's episode, I was wondering if you could share which are the primary resources or partnerships that you are seeking to advance in your targets. As I said earlier, you never know who is going to jump on this discussion.
Yeah.
And
I would say that, and I think this is a common ground for many startup/scale-ups. It's the 3 C's. It's customers. We want and we are ready for real customers. Not only proof of concepts or an early trial, customers that are willing to pay and for our solution and are in also the forefront of electrification. Capital, of course, as a deep tech hardware company, of course, we also have a software part. We are a little bit more project capex intense, so we need capex, we need capital to build up our company, and then competence. So people who are willing to dive into this journey together with us. We have always a need for power electronic engineers, but now we're also starting to build up the business part. So people who are interested in joining us, we also would like to attract. So customers, capital, competence.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So anyone who has any of these, jump in and contact Elonroad.
Yeah.
Now, I think one common question that is always getting various answers, and I'm always looking forward to this part, is asking you, based on your experience, what practical advice would you offer to other stakeholders in the startup ecosystem? So maybe to fellow entrepreneurs, but also for accelerators, let's say, or investors. What would you want to see happening?
I think that the startup ecosystem is quite, as we spoke about before, it's quite advanced in Europe, and it's very competent. I would say what I would like to see more of is bridging the old industry, but bigger companies with startup and entrepreneurs and also VCs. So, and that goes both ways. So both we need to understand how big corporations function, but big corporations also need to realize that we are part of the future and are a huge contributor to, to the wealth of the future. So I would like to see more curiosity in between those spheres, because it is a little bit sometimes, what do you say, like silos in between, and the entrepreneurs think that they are, the big companies are too slow and just building an old legacy, and the big companies think that we are crazy and don't follow any rules. And I think we can learn a lot from each other if we dare to listen and be curious from both ways.
Great advice, and I think you went straight to the point. Some curiosity is needed on both sides, and some openness.
Yes.
And how about, I don't know, accelerators? What piece of advice would you have for them? What would you like them to change in their programs?
I think generally, the accelerators are doing a good job. I think the one thing that I sometimes get a little bit, maybe I'm tired of, is, getting advice on our technology. We know our technology, but what I would like to hear more of is, challenging on the business side. So, okay, how does your market look? What is the market fit? What are your first customers? How can we help in tying those? Because that's usually what we need help with on the business and market side. The technology, we are, I would say, generally in the entrepreneurial world, that's our babies that we know.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. So, Anna, thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing your insights on Elonroad and the future of transportation, and for the very, I think, straightforward discussion about various parts of the ecosystem. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Adrian, for great conversation and great questions.
Thank you again for joining us, and also to our audience, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the InnovX Innovators Podcast, and please stay around for a new episode coming soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.